Hello and welcome to Wisp Radio's Amazon show with me, Chris Stafford. My guest today is Juliana Buhring, who is an ultra-endurance cyclist, having taken on some of the longest bike rides in the world in the past 4 years after discovering the sport by opportunity rather than ambition. Juliana was raised in the religious sect Children of God and suffered shocking abuse from which she eventually broke free, only later to lose the love of her life in a tragic accident. It was during this period of grieving that she was inspired by a friend to start biking and take on marathon challenges. In 2012, Juliana cycled around the world, which took 152 days from Naples to Naples, with 144 of those actually pedalling, and for which she made the Guinness Book of Records. A year later, she took on the inaugural Transcontinental Race from London to Istanbul. In 2014, she won the women's category and finished fourth overall in the Trans Am race from Oregon to Virginia, over 4,322 miles and lasting more than 20 days. And this year, she completed the race across America, crossing 12 states and 3,000 miles. In 2017, Juliana takes on Australia when she bikes from Perth to Sydney without any support crew. Juliana, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a little bit of background as to where we find you in the world right now. Where are you based?
At the moment, actually, as of the last 7 years, I've been based in Italy around the Naples area, which is actually where I started cycling 4 years ago. If you've ever been to Naples, you'll know it's true chaos on the street. There's no rules. So it was pretty funny the first few months trying to learn to ride a bike on those streets.
Pretty hairy down there. So tell us why you began your cycling career in Italy.
Actually, it was quite random why I got into cycling at all. I never would have thought of, the bike being a sport I would take up. I decided one day I wanted to cycle around the world. And this was off the back of someone who I loved very much had just died, and I just had I was in a very dark place and I had a very difficult time kind of pulling myself out of this depression I'd fallen into. And so I guess that was my way of, doing something drastic to get myself out of this slump I was in. And cycling, because, someone put the idea in my head during the memorial service for this guy. She was saying, I was thinking about cycling across Canada. You want to come with me? And it was the first time I ever even thought, cycling? Like, why would I cycle across Canada? And then I thought, well, if I was going to cycle anywhere, where would I want to cycle? And so I went online and started looking up, interesting cycle journeys, and eventually caught on to the men who had gone around the world, cycled around the world. And from there, it pretty soon became obvious that there had been no woman done this around the world circumnavigation. I thought that's just really odd for this day and age. It was 2012, but how has there not been a woman who's officially circumnavigated the world? So I guess that kind of got me on that track. And the first thing I had to do was learn to ride a bike, which I promptly did with great enthusiasm and very little know-how. So I had this kind of heavy touring bike and, my gym shoes, and was, just pedaling along a few, extra miles every day until I got to the around 120 kilometer mark that I could cycle, easily from day to day. And during the time I was looking for a sponsor, because I was like, well, I need money if I'm going to cycle the world. Couldn't find a sponsor, but I did manage to get a bicycle sponsored for the ride. So off of that, the bike sponsor then put me onto a trainer, and this trainer wrote me up a program to try and build me some muscle. Told me, well, you've got to change your shoes to cleats and, clips, and you've got to clip into the bike. And it was just a process. But from the time I started preparing for this to the time I left was about, I think, 8 months. And finally I set off because I couldn't get any sponsors, couldn't find the funding. And I thought, well, maybe if I leave, then someone will pick me up along the way, because they'll see I'm serious about it. And so I left with about 3,000 euros and started pedaling. And ran out of money fairly quickly. No, actually, I managed to get through Europe and the US, and then ran out of money in New Zealand. And by this time, people were following me on Facebook because they thought this was the wackiest thing they've ever seen. The chick who doesn't know how to cycle was like, gonna get on this bike. And oh yes, I should mention then that I then changed over to a road bike 10 days before I left, which if you've ever cycled know there's a massive difference between an ordinary bike and a road bike. The positioning, the handling of it, everything was completely different. So I was just wobbling all over the place. It was almost funny if it wasn't so sad. But I fell a lot, and I still do actually.
Oh,
I think I've got the record for the most scars on my knees of anybody I know.
and you also have the Guinness World Record for doing this. We shouldn't forget that. You may have a number of scars, Juliana, but you did get recognised for riding, 29,000 kilometres, 18,000 miles in a total time of 152 days. That's a lot of saddle time for somebody who came into cycling by accident, in a way, an opportunity. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your sporting interests prior to that, Juliana. What were there any? In fact, even if you weren't cycling, did you have any sporting interest or activity prior to that?
No, I didn't do any sport before that. When I was a teenager, I would kick around a ball sometimes with friends, or sometimes we would play basketball for fun, but never actually, practiced any sport, and definitely not in the 10 years leading up to the ride or getting on a bike. So no, I was actually physically very unfit, and so part of my training plan was just to get my heart rate in good shape and and put some muscle on me because I had none. And yeah, I have to say that the trainer told the guy who was helping me manage logistics, and he took him aside and he said, "Listen, she's not ready. You can't let her go around the world the way she rides now. She's never going to come back." He said she should at least wait a year. She can, you need to be a cyclist before you can cycle the world. And I said, well, by the time I come back, I'll be a cyclist. By the time I came back, I was in pretty good shape. And I realized I was pretty good at riding very long distances. And so from that point, I got into the racing aspect, the long distance racing.
You certainly did, and you built on that. But some would say, okay, if you're going to start in a sport, let's start with maybe something a little bit more modest. Why did you feel that at that point in your life, when you were still grieving such a major loss, that you would take on such a major undertaking as that, going around the world? Did you not think, well, maybe, since I haven't done this before, I'll just do it, in pieces, or something more modest? What was the drive and ambition, Juliana, to take on such a huge challenge so early in your cycling career?
Well, I have to say that I'm a bit of an extremist. So if I go do something, I'm going to do it to the maximum that can possibly be done. So I never do anything by halfway. So for me, it was like, if I'm going to cycle a long distance, I'm going to do the longest possible distance I can do. And if I'm going to do it, I might as well try and go for a record while I'm at it too. So it was kind of one of these, it seemed to me an obvious link between what's the maximum I can do and that's the maximum. But I think at the time as well, I wasn't thinking very straight. I think now if I was in the position I was in then, physically and everything else, and had not been grieving and had not been in completely, I wouldn't say out of my mind, but I certainly did not have my head on straight, they might say. So I think at that point, I wanted to just escape, and I needed a way to escape. And for me, I was just going to go on a journey, and actually it didn't matter at the point whether I came back or not. I was thinking that if I make it, great, but if I don't, that's okay too. And I was at that kind of dark place mentally. So I wouldn't say it was a suicide mission, but people are like, it was dangerous, something can happen to you, you can die, but I was just like, I don't care. And I think that probably because I was in that mental state, I didn't think through what it would mean to cycle the world. And therefore, I did set off completely unprepared, and probably no person in their right mind would do the same thing. And I think if I'm, in the place I'm in now mentally, I wouldn't have done it either. So yeah, it really on a whim. I've just got to get out of here.
Did it prove to be the cathartic experience that you needed to transition and move on in your life?
Oh, definitely. I mean, by the halfway point, when I realized, wow, I'm halfway around the world and all roads from here lead home, I thought, oh, I might actually do this. And by that point, I think I had found a way to move on, not just, the physical act of moving towards this goal was also a mental way of being able to move on from this trauma that I had just been through in this dark place. And so I think it was very much mental as much as it was physical for me. And the further I went, the better I became, the stronger I became physically and the stronger I became mentally. Until by the end, I think I was a completely different person. And I think I hadn't even really processed how much that ride changed me, because it's a continual process. And I think looking back now, I can really see it. At the time, it didn't feel much like it. But by the time I got to the end, I was no longer in this place of grieving, and I was excited to move on and see what else I could do in life. And I had reawakened the desire to, see more and do more and experience more. So, yeah, it completely changed everything for me.
Well, it certainly wasn't without its suffering along the way with all the obstacles. That's a huge story in itself, which you have, we should mention, chaptered in your new book, This Road I Ride. I'd like to talk about that a little bit later on. But if you go back to this experience and what you took from it personally, but also alongside that was the emergence of this elite endurance cyclist that you didn't know was in you.
Yeah, I was shocked myself. And I say it all the time, but I really believe that we all have a lot of untapped potential that we don't even realize we're capable of, because, I would have never thought I could be an endurance cyclist. It never even crossed my mind to get on a bike. And it was really a random thing that put me on a bike in the first place. And I think, how many other things are we capable of doing that we don't know, unless for some weird situation you're forced into trying. And so I think that, yeah, we're full of untapped potential, and it's a matter of accidentally falling into it or just being brave enough to try something completely out of your comfort zone.
Well, now, of course, your training, your preparation, your support team and everything around you when you do these big races is that much more advanced, more sophisticated, I'm sure, in your preparation and your training. Having done that, after that, the Transcontinental Race, the Trans Am Bike Race, and of course the RAMM. You should explain to everybody what that RAMM is.
Yep, the Race Across America. That is the longest standing ultra-endurance bicycle race, therefore it's the most known. But it is also a supported race. Most of the racing I prefer to do is unsupported, and it's much more of an adventure race, so it's much closer to what I was doing when I was cycling the world, where you have to bring your own gear, you have to find your own food and water, you've got to fix your own flats, and you fix your own bike if it breaks, and basically just look out for yourself and do your own navigation and everything like that. So it's actually much tougher, in my opinion, than the Race Across America, and they're now increasing massively in popularity. They're very recent, these ultra unsupported races. So they go across continents, they go across Europe, they go across America, and the one coming up now is across Australia. And for me, those are actually, they challenge you on every level, not just on your cycling ability. So you've got to know a bit about everything, really. And those excite me the most, because I like that. I like the idea of being out there on your own. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what's going to happen to you, and it's all an adventure. You don't know where you're going to arrive each day, and where you're going to get your next meal. And it's that's what excites me.
Not to take away from the book, which we're going to encourage everyone to buy a copy of, but in terms of what you're learning about yourself, what were your biggest takeaways from becoming an elite sportswoman?
It's funny, I don't recognize myself as an elite sportswoman. I just think I'm a bit mad, and I like going off mad adventures. I didn't even think that I was that great at cycling either. I didn't call myself a cyclist until a couple of years ago. I just, I didn't associate myself with what an average cyclist is, or the way they, their passion of cycling. I would just jump on any bike and ride. I'm not, into the technical details and, naming each part and, what make do you have and all of that. For me, it wasn't about that. It was just about the adventure of, being on the open road. And so I think in that aspect, it didn't feel I was really a cyclist. And only now recently I've gotten more into the technical side, just because it does improve, it does help your game if you do know exactly, the correct positioning, the correct this, and know a bit about your parts and which parts work better than others. So, it all adds up for sure. I've learned, I think, that you're always stronger than you think you are. And the times the toughest times I've had have also been the most rewarding. So I don't want to say pain, but the more you suffer, the more you reach this place that you kind of surpass the pain, and you surpass the difficulty level mentally and physically. And when you get past that, you're actually capable of just going on indefinitely. And it is incredible to me how far the body can go when you think it shouldn't be able to anymore. And so for me, I've taken a lot away from the mind and body connection that for me is more and more I've played with it over the course of different races, and realized that if the mind is not ready to quit, you can keep going physically. Your body can keep going. You can keep pushing it. For example, in the race the Trans Am bike race, which is also across America from coast to coast. The second day of the race, I had a crash and broke one of my ribs. And so I was cycling the entire race on a cracked rib, and then my seat post broke. And there was no bike shop I stopped at that had the spare part. And so I was riding half the race with my seat all the way down low and my knees up high, and doing these serious climbs and killing my knees, absolutely destroying them. So they were bloated up, and my ankles and my knees were completely bloated, and I was running on ibuprofen just to keep the swelling down. And by that point, I was so exhausted, and my body should have quit at that point, because I don't know where I got the strength to keep pedaling. But my mind was so in the race. It was like, I'm here, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to quit. And I kept going to the end. I mean, in the last 100 miles, I had done 500 miles without sleeping. And I had been riding for 2 days without sleeping. And from just sitting there so long on the bike, I got this really bad pinched nerve that ran all the way from my knee up my back. So I was literally pedaling with one leg. And I was only 100 miles from the finish line, and I was in tears. I've never cried on a bike till then. Like, I cried. I didn't know how I would make it to the finish line, and it was the longest night of my life. But I was like just so close. I just kept telling myself, pain is temporary, and it's not going to last just 100 miles. You can do is you've just done 4,000 miles. 100 is not too much to ask. So I just kept going, and there was another racer next to me, and by this time, the two of us were battling for fourth place, and we had been yo-yoing each other the last few days, and finally we had this kind of uneasy agreement towards the end. So we were pedaling through the night side by side, and we kept shouting over to each other, "You still awake?" Because we were falling off the bike and sleeping on the bike, and I almost went into a truck, and it was ridiculous. So okay, well, let's keep each other awake. So we would cycle near each other and be like, "You awake? You okay?" And we got to dawn breaking, and it was about 20 miles from the finish line. And the entire way was these cobblestones to the finish line, 20 miles worth of cobblestones.
Ouch.
With this pinched nerve, I was just like, no, I can't believe it. I can't do that. I can't. And it was so close, and it felt so far. And then he goes, my family's waiting at the finish line. I'm just going to sprint this. And I was like, okay, man, you do what you got to do, see you at the finish line kind of thing. And he took off, and I saw him disappearing down the road, and I was like, I just can't let this go. I've come this far, I can't. And so I sprinted after him, and I don't know where I got that force from, but my brain was just determined to get to that finish line with him. I wasn't going to let him get ahead of me. And I just sprinted right after him. He turned and he saw me. He couldn't believe it. He's like, because he had seen me crying the whole night with this pinched nerve. We crossed the finish line together, and so at that point I realized that you think you can't, and you can always keep going. There's always that 20% more in you that you don't think you have, and it's all about your mind being able to control your body and tell it what to do. So I think for me, that's what I've taken away most, and it crosses over into everyday life too, not just on the bike but in everything. So the more you pass those points, the more you realize you're capable of, the stronger you become, and the little things around you, the little things on the difficulties on the bike, the little challenges in life even just don't seem that big a deal anymore. And everything is, you just take everything, I think, with much more of a grain of salt. It's much more, you're relaxed about everything, and whatever comes to you, you could handle it. And I think that's what I've taken away.
You keep discovering yourself clearly, and it's an amazing journey, life journey, isn't it? I mean, as well as what you came through in your childhood, which we want to touch on as well, because I think that really shaped you, obviously, and it's a very, very moving story how it all began. Can you summarize that for us now in your own words? The kind of person that had shaped you from the childhood you had within that religious sect, Juliana, and then your young adulthood before you discovered cycling and how it completely changed your life.
Yes, so I was born into the Children of God sect and was raised, well, actually from the time I was 3, was raised just by random people within the group. So my parents kind of left me as property of the group. And I didn't see my mom again till I was, I think, 14 years old. And it was a very extremist, I would say, fundamentalist kind of religious group. So it was a very harsh upbringing for the children in it. We didn't have our basic human rights. We weren't given medical care. We weren't allowed education, going to school. And it was a very closed environment. So although I was passed around through many countries, I grew up around Asia and Africa, we were always behind high walls with barbed wire on top. It was like being in a prison, really. And I think that probably developed, from that I developed a great amount of independence, not having a family or parents to look out for me. So I had to look out for myself. And but then always gave me that hunger that I wanted to see, and I wanted to know the things they weren't telling me. I wanted to know what was outside of the walls. I wanted to know what was outside in the big world. And so I suppose that curiosity carried over as well into my adult life. And so when I left, it really was such a hunger for knowledge and experiences that I had been deprived of growing up. And I think that sure has contributed greatly to towards the things that I've pursued in life and my lifestyle, and wanting to just see as much as I can and experience that, or know, self-awareness, know myself and what I'm capable of.
Well, it's an extraordinary journey of self-awareness, of course, and it's told within your first book, Not Without My Sister, the true story of 3 girls violated and betrayed by those they trusted, a best-selling publication which must have been a cathartic exercise in itself, but it also gave you an interest in writing, didn't it? In developing your writing, which you've done now, taking you to your second book, This Road I Ride, which was published earlier this year. Summarize that for us, Juliana, because we will put a link in our show notes to both of these titles and why you felt the need to write.
Well, the first book was, I suppose it started for me as a kind of self-therapy to kind of figure out what happened to me, my family, and all of our generation of children who were born and raised in this group. So I started writing it for that reason. And then my sisters, incidentally, who were also writing their memoir, so we decided we would do one together. And at that time, we were trying to expose what was happening in the group. My brothers and sisters were still growing up in that environment. I wanted them to, have a life free of I wanted them to have a proper childhood that I didn't get to have. So I wanted things to change within the group. And that book went a long way to bringing down the group as we knew it. And it now really doesn't exist anymore as a proper organization. It's, they were disbanded in 2010, thanks to all the negative publicity they received. And, knowledge is power. So, you go on the internet and, they just couldn't hide behind all of their aliases anymore. And, the funding stopped, people stopped joining, and so they basically had to disband because they were dying. So that was a huge victory for us. And off the back of that book, we started a foundation to help children born and raised in these extremist groups to be able to integrate into society and, get an education, get jobs, and just figure out life on the outside, and also just keep an eye on the children who are still in these groups who don't have their human rights, and make a fuss when and where possible when they are being deprived of their rights. So we then merged with Safe Passage Foundation, who are still going strong today and who I always ride for and raise funds for, and they provide scholarships for these kids coming out and emergency funding if they need help to get out of bad situations. So they're still very active, and I still raise money for them. And So from that, I then needed a bit of a breather. It was all a bit much being in that anti-cult world and, bringing down the group and all of that. So I escaped to Italy, where nobody knew me and, wanted to start over and do my own thing for a while. So I got a job. I was teaching in some of the schools in Naples, and that was around the time when I was in touch with my friend who died, and we were actually due to meet up that New Year, so just a couple weeks before he died. And he was on an expedition in the Congo. He was a kayaker. He was kayaking with two Americans on one of the undiscovered rivers in the Congo. And a big crocodile came up out of the water and took him under, and that was it. And it was such a blow for me, such a shock. I had finally reconnected with this guy. I had known him from when I was younger, and we had had quite a passionate affair. And when we reconnected, it was like no time had passed for us. And so that just losing someone that I cared about was really such a blow for me. And so from that started the whole cycling career. And I think the second book came about strangely. I had, because of the Guinness World Record rules, I had been not forced, but part of their rules was to keep a logbook with just everyday information, anything interesting that happened, any breakdowns, and people's signatures that I met. So from this logbook, I had actually written a lot of stuff down, a lot of my thoughts. It was almost like a diary of every single day on the road. And so from that, when I came back, I already had this diary, which was like a book. And the book itself is written in the same diary format and taken from this logbook and then expanded on. So many of my kind of musings, internal musings on the road, are then projected into those, daily entries. And that's now in the book. So I started writing it down, just thinking, well, I could, tell the story of, how I went from nothing to cycling the world. And I started it and then put it down, and I didn't feel inspired to continue. And then just out of the blue, got an agent who was interested, and it was like, I'm going to pitch the book, and sold the book. So then I had to write it. And so that forced me to actually sit down and put it together. And the book came about fairly fast. Within 6 months, I had turned it in. So yeah, for the second book, for me, it's much more of a positive one than the first. It's more of the progression of my journey from being, from this difficult childhood into becoming, a stronger person, and I suppose I hope more empathetic with other people and other people's suffering. And and the journey around the world is really about the people I meet on the way as well. And I had always felt this isolation from the world and from society because I hadn't grown up in it, and I didn't feel a connection to anything. I had a completely different idea of the world, and when I came into it, it was something that I hadn't expected. So I've always felt very cut off and isolated from everyday life and everyday people. And this journey around the world also just reconnected me and made me feel so much more a part of everybody, the entire world. We are all connected in some way, and I really felt that connection just cycling, the amount of people that helped me on the way. And I got around the world just from people following me and sending little donations because they wanted to see me succeed, and the generosity of strangers on the road, people chasing me down to give me money or put me up for the night or feed me. And it was just overwhelming experience of just how much generosity, kindness, and love there is out there. And so I guess when I came back, I was also a different person mentally, and that I no longer felt disconnected from the world. I felt I was very much part of it all.
And still hungry for challenges. You mentioned the next one in Australia, across Australia no less, and that dreadful Nullarbor plane that you're going to take on from Perth to Sydney, which is how many miles?
Perth to Sydney is, I think it's 3,200 miles or 3,300 miles. Somewhere around there. And the Nullarbor section is about 1,000 miles of nothing. And I can say, because I've cycled through it, it's the most mind-numbing road on Earth. It is the longest straight, flat road on Earth, in fact.
Yes.
And as far as I can see in either direction, the road doesn't bend, it doesn't move. There's no trees to break up the scenery. It's just shrubs and desert.
It is as boring as it comes, isn't it? I've travelled that road myself. It really is. I admire you for taking on that alone, because boredom will set in very early on.
I download a lot of audiobooks to get me through those boring times. Like,
I
at least
think so.
your brain interested in something, yeah, so you can pass the time quicker. But yeah.
And I hope you download some of the Wisp Sports podcasts here at Wisp Radio. We have a ton of podcasts now. You can listen to all kinds of stories.
I known about it before.
There you go. All right, that will keep you company. We'll think about you across the Nullarbor. Tell us when this is going to take place. Next year, next spring, you're going to set off, or in the winter their time.
Yeah, actually, well, it'll be the
fall their time. Yes.
And spring our time, and which is lucky for me, because when I went across it was spring. And the magpies were out in full force, dive bombing kamikaze style into my helmet. And I went across Australia under constant bird attack. But this time there won't be any magpie attacks, hopefully, since they're not going to be nesting. And hopefully also no giant horseflies biting my behind.
Hopefully not.
It should be slightly more enjoyable this time around.
Absolutely. And this you expect to take you how long, Juliana, to cross Australia?
I'll never say, because all possible eventualities. I'm best friends with Murphy. Murphy's Law is the story of my life. Everything that can possibly go wrong in a race goes wrong. And first off, I will crash. 100%. I crash on every single race I've ever ridden. But yeah, I have everything happens to me, so I never make a projection. All I can hope is to do the very best I can and push as hard as I can. And whatever the outcome is from that, I'll know that I have done my 100%, and that will make it satisfying for me. And that's the only reason to do anything, I think, is for yourself above all, and not for the applause or the appraise of anyone else.
Tell us about your training and your support crew.
So this is also an unsupported race. So actually, the only race I've had where I've had a support crew was the Ram, and I really did not enjoy it, because I didn't like having people constantly behind me, breaking my balls. But yeah, shouting, and just you couldn't get into your headspace. It was just very stressful. But this is unsupported, as most of the races have been, and I'm gonna not have any support crew at all, which is great. So yeah, I work out my own salvation, and training. My training has changed a lot over the past couple of years to become much more less strict and much more organic. As in, I really listen to my body more, and I don't force myself or overstress myself. And I've changed my diet. I now have a ketogenic diet, so which is low. With anti-inflammatory, and I've got problems with my knees since I destroyed them, and so they're very painful, and I have to basically keep them in check at all times. So this diet has helped a lot with anti-inflammation of my joints, and gives me the possibility of cycling up 200 kilometers without eating if I need to, if I can't find a place to stop or I can't find food. So it's very strategically, it's also a great thing, I think, for an endurance athlete in general. I would recommend it to any endurance athlete. So basically, your body functions on fat instead of carbohydrates, which just means that it's more efficient burning. So it's much more efficient kind of fuel for the endurance athlete.
What about fluid intake, though, Juliana? I mean, you're going across Australia. You're going across some very hot expanses, no protection whatsoever. How do you manage with fluids?
Yeah, I mean, over the Nullarbor, there's big sections, I think, 300 kilometers at a time without anything at all. So, there'll be tiny little service stations every 200-300 kilometers, which means, I'm going to have to carry a lot more than I average, that I usually would. So I'm probably going to at least carry about 4 liters at a time with me. But thanks to this diet as well, I can also go for much longer on less fluid than I used to be able to. So if I need to, I can actually cut back quite a bit. But yeah, 4 liters should land me around 300 kilometer point. Fine.
Tell us the name of that diet again.
It's the ketogenic diet, It's similar to paleo kind of diet, except you don't eat. Basically, you don't eat refined carbohydrates. You don't eat flour. You don't eat sugar, and you fuel yourself on high good fats like olive oil, coconut oil. I eat a lot of avocado, a lot of eggs, things that people would consider high fat or high cholesterol, but they actually lower the cholesterol, surprisingly, and it's carbs that make your cholesterol go up. Which the whole thing is a very fascinating study, but you can look it up on the internet for all the facts you want. But it's a ketogenic diet, so your body runs on ketones as opposed to carbs.
Okay, well, we'll put a link in our show notes to that too, because I think someone will be fascinated by that. So finally, Juliana, with someone who has these big goals as you do, you must have an enormous bucket list, do you? Or do you just wait for opportunities to present themselves? How do you look at your future and what you want to be doing in 10 years' time?
I never think that far ahead, I'm afraid. Anytime I've ever tried to plan too far ahead in life, something always happens to completely ricochet me in a different direction. And then life is so full of big surprises and, ones that you might not even think were good ones. Like, my friend dying. If he hadn't died, I would never have gotten on a bike and I would never have become an endurance athlete. So my life took a completely different direction than I could have imagined. And those kind of things, I guess, have made me not less likely, but yes, less likely to plan too far ahead. So I hope in 10 years' time I will have done as much in those 10 years as I've done in the last 10. I hope I will have lived life to the max. I try and live every day feeling that, well, if it's my last day, I can, go knowing that I've lived this day the best I possibly could. And I've lived all the days before that the best I could. And I've lived the best life I possibly could. So I think I live more, not day to day. You can plan ahead, but I think also just thinking more of things being temporary, because life is temporary and nothing ever lasts in life. I think it enables you to also to have experience more the present and appreciate every moment and be more present in everyday experiences. So, yeah, I would like to say 10 years I'll still be cycling, but you never know what will happen in 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Be open to opportunities every single day. And do you have actually a bucket list?
I do. I have such a bucket list. I'm going to try and hit this bucket list over the next year or two, actually. I'm keeping this under wraps, but I have so many countries that I still plan to cycle through, and not necessarily in a race format, just cycle. So I've got such a long list, but my really big one I want to do is Alaska to South America. I really want to cycle South America because it's a continent I haven't done yet, and I really want to see Alaska by bike. So those are two big ones for me. I hope to get around to all the continents eventually. I've already done 4 of them more than once.
So funding then, you mentioned sponsorship before, and in the early days you didn't have any, but what is it like now?
No, in fact, I still do not have a sponsor. I have found it extremely difficult to find sponsors, and I don't know why this could be, but it might possibly be because I don't really have a country to rally behind me, if that makes sense. So often, people will have their athletes from their country, and, the sponsors will all get behind them and they sponsor their athlete because, they're coming from their area, their country. But I'm kind of from nowhere. So I think that makes me a wild card, and maybe for sponsors it makes it less attractive. I'm not sure. That could be one of the reasons. It's always anyway much harder for women to get sponsors than men in sport in general. I don't know if you've spoken with other women about this, but other cyclist women that I've spoken to have the same problem. And those are even the ones who are, racing in competitive teams. They still, can barely get enough of a salary just to live from day to day. So it's really tough. And maybe it's because, they think that the sponsors think that there's not enough publicity or there's not enough viewing time of women in sport as opposed to men. But I am hoping, and I think it is changing. I think that women are now, getting more airtime. I hope at least that's the case. And always, of course, when you're the first to do something in any field, and in ultra endurance cycling, there's very few women in this field. So, and it's already a very niche kind of cycling I suppose, race. It's very out there, kind of like the X Games of cycling, and very few people participate in it. And, it's followed online, but it's not followed in the media. So, yeah, it all adds up to make it a bit difficult to find sponsors, and I still don't have one. And I've actually so far raced off of people donating who are love to watch me race and love to see what I'm up to next. And every time I'm going to race, I always get just a ton of people sending money to my PayPal going, here's for the race. And I think it's wonderful. And people have followed me from the World Cycle to today. They still follow me and they still send me donations to keep me on the road, which is really, for me, means so much. So I think, the social networks have been what's actually kept me on the road riding.
It's amazing how that has been obviously supportive to you in your endeavours. And you have a day job, do you? Did you still do some teaching while you're living in Naples?
No, I had a bed and breakfast, cyclist-friendly bed and breakfast on the coast, which I just gave up a year ago and moved a bit further down the coast. And I'm now going to set up a cycling training camp holidays. So that's gonna fund my rides from this point out.
That's a fantastic, great idea. I'm sure and especially down there, you're bound to get some support for that idea.
Yeah. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Wonderful. And any other books that we can expect to come down the pike in the future, Juliana? Are there any writing ambitions to fulfill? Yeah,
and I am still writing. So at the moment, I write for the Huffington Post once in a while, but I'm writing 2 books. I'm writing, one is a fiction that takes place in Naples, and one is just a continuation of my racing stories and what it means for a woman to race extreme endurance. But I think there's not much out there about it, what that means physically and how you train and what you do on your races. And so my next book will probably be more about info about racing, ultra racing.
Awesome, and we should remind everybody those 2 books, This Road I Ride, the latest one, along with the previous publication, Not Without My Sister. They're both available, and we'll put a link on our show notes, Juliana. It's been great to talk to you. It's a job to keep up with you, though, with all these adventures along the way, but we will follow you. We'll put links to your social media as well, and hopefully people will tune into what you're doing and follow your journeys. So the very, very best of luck. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, you'll find a list of resources in the show notes accompanying this episode at wispsports.com. And whilst you're there, be sure to check out all the other global women's sports coverage, whether it's podcasts, videos, blogs, or features. It's all at wispsports.com, and you can also join in the conversation via our social media channels. Just look for Wisp Sports. Until the next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.